Hi everyone, this is Vince George with DTMMB Media. This is episode 2 of Movies Are Cool. Today we're going to look at the movie Prisoners. I've got here today with me Chris Herndon.
Hello Vince, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well, thank you.
Great.
Intro. Okay, and we're back. Today we're going to talk about Prisoners. I will say that this will not be spoiler-free. This is pretty much intended for people who have seen the movie, and we're going to basically do a little bit of analysis on it and what we thought, see if you agree with us. If you don't agree, leave us some comments. If you do agree, leave us some comments. You can do it on SoundCloud. You can do it on our blog at dtmmbmedia.com. You can send me a tweet at /DTMMB Media. You can put it on our Tumblr. You could probably put it on Stumble Upon. I think we have that. I don't know if they allow comments. Let's see, where else are we? We're on...
You could just Google Don't Tell Me My Business Media and just follow the links.
Yeah,
for comments.
I mean, there should be several thousand of them. We're pretty much everywhere there's social media, including I went back in times and made a GeoCities page for us, so we should be there as well.
Perfect. And it's not only limited to people who have seen the movie. These could also be for people who might want to see the movie but don't really care.
Right, about spoilers.
Yeah, I mean, there's people like that.
Yeah, and I would say if you're going to do that with a movie, this would be a one to do it on. I think we figured out the twists and the turns fairly early on. I think if you're a regular movie watcher, nothing that happens should be a huge surprise.
If you're a critical thinker.
Yeah, if you're a critical thinker. I will say the crowd that we saw it with, they were probably shocked at many times during the movie, and we'll get into their reactions a little bit. Let's get into the basic plot of the story. How would you describe that, Chris?
Well, I mean, the basic plot is a mystery. It starts off, we are introduced to a couple of families, middle America type families. You learn, a couple kids, neighbors in a Pennsylvania town.
Yeah.
Middle America, you find out that they've got, just like everybody in this country, have some money problems, but they're fighting through it, and they seem to be tightly knit families and good friends.
Right.
Within the same neighborhood, and once that's established, both families have young girls. Maybe, I don't know what you say, Vince. Maybe 6 or 7, 8 years old, something like that.
Yeah, I would say around that age.
Single-digit ages, and they disappear, presumably abducted, and that horrible act brings in the police, led by the detective, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. Very well done performance by him.
And this does take place also through Thanksgiving.
Yes,
so they don't really play up the holiday angle, but it is.
It opens at Thanksgiving with two neighbor families who are close knit enough that they spend Thanksgiving together.
Right.
So that's kind of an important plot point to start, and basically the movie follows this case. Probably maybe a week or two of time, and they're pretty. One criticism I have of a lot of movies is that they don't give you a lot of time reference, and sometimes things feel either like there's no way that could have occurred in that amount of time, or you're not sure how much time passed. In this movie, time is a very a very important element of the story.
It's very deliberate how the time plays out. Every day, Hugh Jackman, who plays Keller Dover, who is the father of one of the girls that's missing, every day when time passes, he makes sure that Detective Loki, who, as Chris mentioned, is played by Jake Gyllenhaal, he wants him to know, hey, these girls are running out of time. You should be out there looking for them. So he's like, 5 days have passed at one point. So we're very keenly aware of how much time is passing, as Chris has alluded to.
Yeah, and you really get action from every day. You really get a good feel for the amount of time that Detective Loki is spending on the case, and you can tell that it is absolutely dominating his life. You see really nothing else about his life other than his police work, but not because he's got a life outside of his police work. It's because police work in at least the way this movie portrays him, is his life. So he's a very powerful character in this. And the wrinkle in this movie, we'll just go ahead, like Vince said, spoilers abound. The wrinkle in this movie, from other abduction mysteries that I've seen, is the wrinkle of having the Hugh Jackman character, Keller Dover, the father of one of the victims, kind of take law into his own hands. So you have him getting involved in the case, essentially torturing a suspect in hopes of finding his daughter. At the same time, you have Detective Loki searching, for clues to solve the actual case, and so that's a little bit different wrinkle. There's really kind of two crimes going on at the same time that are related, and so that was an interesting twist on it. When I saw the previews, I wondered, why are they calling this Prisoners? Mm-hmm. Is this an abduction, or is the family captured, or why are they calling it Prisoners? Is it referring to the two girls that are abducted? Not really. It's referring to the girls that are abducted, the victims, as well as the suspect that, we'll get into the detail on this, but the suspect as well, Hugh Jackman character, has abducted and is held a prisoner.
There are so many layers and so much depth to this movie.
For a pretty straightforward story, it really does.
It's a straightforward story. I mean, you think it's just going to be a police procedural, but it really goes very deep into anything from morality to these undertones that you think about a lot after the movie. The movie actually opens with Hugh Jackman saying a prayer, and he's out with his son, and they're hunting, and they're about to shoot a deer. So he's Hugh Jackman saying a prayer. So you see that he's got this relationship already with religion, and religion does play a part in this movie, some of the motivations, and it really kind of gets you thinking about the whole morality angle that was taken throughout. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this movie and trying to tear it apart afterwards, and the more I look at it, the more layers I see. I mean, we look at the Detective Loki character just by himself, and the complexity of that character throughout. He presents himself as probably he was probably a gang member at one time. He's got a lot of tattoos, a prominent tattoo on his neck. He's got the tattoos on his fingers, and presents himself like he's from the streets.
But there's also another interesting angle about him, actually two that I can think of right now. He has a lot of tics.
Right.
They show him blinking a lot, and I don't know if that was a choice made by Jake during the filming, or if this was something that's written into the backstory of the script that we aren't privy to. But he had some tics, which kind of makes you think that he's dealt with that issue at some point. I'm not sure if it's a mental thing or something. He's got some weird tics. And then also they make a point of showing his masonry ring at several occasions in the movie. So that kind of, I don't know if we normally associate gangbangers with Masons.
Yeah,
it's so I don't know if the story maybe is that maybe he came from a family of Masons, which I don't know what you read into that. I mean, it's not the 1700s any longer, so I'm not sure what we can read into that.
What it did, I think, is it added depth to a character where you didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on his backstory, and I think this movie does a lot of this, especially, and we'll get to the ending, but it lets you kind of develop your own story around this.
It's a very, very smart movie. Right. I mean, you hear that term "smart" thrown around with cinema a lot, but in this, I think it's completely apropos. It doesn't spend a lot of time on exposition in terms of what are the backgrounds of these characters. You basically learn the characters through some really well done photography and some very good performances. The dialogue is very effective, and there's not a lot of extra information thrown at you. the main narrative is exactly what you need to know to keep the mystery interesting, and then the character development is just done through these other means and allows you to build a backstory in these characters.
Right. The presentation, the fact that you see that the Keller Dover character played by Jackman, he drives a truck. He's a carpenter. You can tell, he's got this close relationship with religion. He's a hardworking guy. He takes care of his family, and it doesn't directly tell you a lot of this. It's just done through the presentation of the movie.
Yeah, a couple of things you learn about him right out of the gate. Vince, you mentioned the deer hunting scene.
Mm-hmm.
I took that as this is a rite of passage. You had this is a ritual among a lot of Middle American,
Sure.
Families involved with hunting. I know my family is like this in some respects as well. That taking your son out for his first, kill, as it were. That's kind of a rite of passage. He also kind of layers that with the religious aspect, which essentially just kind of reinforces that ritualistic part of that scene. So that this is a guy who not only religious but also has tradition. This is what I'm taking from it. That he has a tradition. He's carrying on a what his father taught him, and his father's father taught his father, and et cetera, and now he's passing it along to his son.
Which they have that talk in the truck as well afterwards,
Yes.
where he passes on the knowledge that his father told him to be prepared for anything, which is also something that we discussed right after the movie, and we'll probably touch on.
But my main point is just that this is a guy who is very dedicated to family, very dedicated to tradition, very dedicated to preparing his son for anything that might occur. I wouldn't call him a doomsday prepper, but he's kind of just almost there.
Right.
Like he wants his son to be prepared for any scenario. And the number one, and he imparts this in a couple different ways, but the main focus is protect your family, stand up for your family, and take care of your own.
Right, and probably at all costs, right, is something that maybe is another theme that being prepared for anything, you'll do it at all costs. Now, I want to ask something about the deer scene. If you think that was also a juxtaposition for his respect of life, considering what happens later in the movie, he's got it, he's saying this prayer before killing the deer. It's obviously like a respect for the animal as well.
I see where you're going with that, and I think you are on the money if you're referring to the Hugh Jackman, the Keller Dover character in the beginning of the film.
Right.
Now, he has a journey in this film, and we're going to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you're right. I think that basically gives us a baseline. This is one of the values that he has, along with tradition, along with religion, this respect for life. But I think that the main point of this movie really branches out of that first scene, in that it is how those feelings are turned on their head when it comes to this horrible, crime that's committed against his family.
Yeah, let's just run down the cast real quick, because it's got a fantastic cast.
First rate.
We have Hugh Jackman, as we've mentioned. We have Jake Gyllenhaal. We also have Viola Davis. We have Maria Bello, Terrence Howard, Melissa Leo, and Paul Dano. All of them have been nominated for something.
Major awards.
Awards, whether Academy Awards or BAFTAs. They're all very well-known actors and actresses.
Melissa Leo, we should mention, actually won her Oscar nomination for, was it The Fighter? Is that the name of that movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Forgive me, I always get that title mixed up on that movie. She actually won hers. Hugh Jackman nominated for Les Mis, Jake Gyllenhaal for Brokeback Mountain. Viola Davis has been nominated twice in the last several years for The Help and Doubt. Terrence Howard, Hustle and Flow. Maria Bello, multiple award nominations, not Oscars per se, but this is a big time cast.
Right.
And of course, when you look at the casting, Carrie Barden and Paul Schnee did the casting for this, and they've got some really good movies, perfect for this type of movie. Seven was a movie they cast, American Psycho, and then Good Will Hunting. So you get a little bit of the.
Well, I did go ahead and put the Three Stooges on here because I know how disappointed you were in the Benicio del Toro being recast out of that movie, and some of the other names that were attached to that. Don't get me started. But actually, if you saw the Three Stooges, the characters were outstanding.
The new one, it ended up being good. Don't get me wrong, but I was kind of hoping more for the. What were the Stooges like when they weren't on screen? And I could just imagine Sean Penn and Benicio del Toro tearing that up, But yeah, that's the whole other thing. But when you look at movies like Seven, American Psycho, definitely, kind of that creepy, horrific crime type of vibe.
I know Good Will Hunting was just brutal.
Good Will Hunting is a different, I was going there.
Oh, okay. Well. Oh, you're probably talking about Seven and American Psycho.
Yeah, Good Will Hunting was, I was going to say, illustrates the award-winning, caliber of acting and writing that that this casting team has dealt with before.
It really felt like Seven to me.
It had we both mentioned Seven. I mean, I know we talked about it after we walked out. I had the Seven vibe as well, for no other reason than the photography, the way they used the rain. A lot of rain in this movie. It was interesting, too, because the rain started about the time when things go bad.
Right, exactly.
And the rain became almost a character in itself. But in the environment, the time, all these elements, they did a really good job of making this movie extra smart, if you would, because they really added so much to the texture of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about the cinematography, the director of photography was Roger Deakins, who's been involved with such films as Skyfall, True Grit, A Serious Man, which I don't know if you saw, but it was a Coen Brothers movie. No Country for Old Men, The Lady Killers. Coen Brothers is all over this guy's resume, and if you've seen those movies, the cinematography is outstanding, and just the look of those films, and there's many shots in this movie that directly borrow from some of these other movies that are just, they really set up the scene well.
Yeah, and if you read this guy's resume, you want to talk about Oscar nominations and accolades. I mean, all the Coen Brothers movies nominated, winning awards, actors in those films winning awards, which obviously cinematography, I mean, in photography is the actor's best friend in a lot of the cases. Maybe something like The Lady Killers may not have been a, award-winning type of film, but a very good film and very well done. House of Sand and Fog, completely different type of thing than The Lady Killers, also extremely well done. And so the point we're making here is that everybody associated with this film is got credibility. He's got chops, major chops, and it shows because it was a very well done, professional looking film.
Right. I mean, this movie was. I felt like it was constructed to say, "Listen, we want to be an Oscar contender." At the end of the day, we want people talking about this movie, and they've done everything they need to do for success. Now, the director is not a well-known director, but I don't feel like it hurt the movie at all. The direction was just fine. It was outstanding. It was directed by Denis Villeneuve. Out of he's also a French Canadian.
Excellent pronunciation.
Yes, I know. He's out of it sounds like Quebec, which we're seeing a lot more movies out of Canada. They're having a film boom, and I don't know if it has something to do with our own economy, or they're offering a lot of tax breaks, or just there's just a lot of top-notch people coming out of there. But this is about the third movie we've talked about that has a French connection.
And we haven't even talked about the French Connection.
I know.
One or two.
I know. We still have that to hit. So this director, he's also involved with another movie that was actually made before this movie called Enemy. also with Jake Gyllenhaal, except it hasn't been released yet. And it's based on a man that seeks out his exact lookalike after spotting him in a movie. It sounds like another kind of heady movie, and with possibly a lot of twists and turns. Apparently, this movie also. I'm saying also, and I'm kind of revealing something about the end of this movie, but it says it also ends abruptly. I'm wondering if this is going to be the new M. Night twist that comes at the end with movies ending abruptly. This movie doesn't end abruptly, and we'll get to that, but apparently this is a signature of this director. And when I say it ends abruptly in this movie, I love the ending.
Great
ending. I thought it was fantastic. And
so many movies add an extra 10 or 15 minutes to the end of a movie. And this is not that kind of movie. As you said, smart. Again, a smart choice.
Oh, the running time was already 2 hours plus on this. I think, about 2 hours and 20 minutes almost? Somewhere in that range. It was definitely over 2 hours. Couldn't exactly tell you. And maybe that's a tribute to the movie. Did not feel long. No, it did not feel long. It did not feel overly long. And that's because of a lot of smart decisions being made throughout the movie not to lay every single detail out in front of you.
Well, I will say this. It's a mystery that at least for us, it wasn't too difficult to figure out kind of who did it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now you probably figured that out fairly early. However, the performances are so good, and the look of the movie is so good and so creepy that even if you are pretty sure you know who did it,
right,
you're still kind of compelled because you just think that something's gonna and they do throw some different layers in there to keep it interesting. But I think that's a tribute to like the overall product of the movie, in that even if you figure out the twist, an hour before the movie ends, you're still compelled to sit there and be really engaged in the movie, and I definitely was throughout the entire film.
I'm going to say I have an appreciation for being able to figure out that twist early, and it didn't cheapen it by taking some random way out at the end.
Right.
The fact that you could, along with these other characters, kind of figure out what was going along with them. You kind of knew the pieces, and as they were being revealed, you're like, aha, yeah, I knew that was coming. I had an appreciation for that, and I could kind of sit back and enjoy the performances without waiting for some twist out of nowhere. That's the problem I had with the movie that I reviewed not too long ago on our blog, Now You See Me. What happened was it was a fine movie until it got to the end, and it just put a random twist in there that no one could have seen coming, and didn't really fit in with the rest of the movie. And I thought that cheapened things.
Yeah, I think that's a crutch in a lot of ways. It's like, we need to, throw that wrinkle in there to make people go, oh, for it to be a good movie. This movie takes the merits of a great script, great performances, great cinematography, and just presents it to you in a way that it makes you think, but you're not sitting, like you said, you're not sitting there looking for every little potential twist. Now, you referenced a movie you've seen recently. I will reference a TV show that I've been watching recently on BBC America, Broadchurch. Mm-hmm. A very well done show. I enjoy it a lot. However, it's a mystery about a child killing that every week it seems like they try to throw another red herring at you. And, I mean, it's entertaining. And for a TV program, a series that you're going to need to go back to week after week, it's probably more of a mechanism that they need to use to keep it compelling. But for a 2-hour movie, you don't necessarily need a bunch of red herrings if the story's smart and believable. That's the thing. Right. This story was believable. Now, we did both figure out kind of who the main perpetrator was of these crimes. However, at least to me, there was some doubt throughout the movie on exactly how all the characters might fit into this. You know,
especially the Paul Dano character.
Yeah, we haven't talked a lot about Paul Dano, but here's the basic setup on Paul, and this is a major plot point.
Can I just point out for a second?
Sure.
I do not like Paul Dano.
You don't like Paul Dano.
I do not like. I'm sure he's probably a fine person, and he's a good actor. I'll say, anything he's ever been in, but he's cast as that creepy kind of guy for a reason.
Yeah.
And he just kind of, I see him, and maybe that's a result of his great performances, but I just can't stand the guy. I didn't feel a bit sorry for him when he was getting beat up in this movie.
Yeah, and he does get really beat up in this movie. Paul Dano, well, let me go back to say, when the children are abducted, there is an RV, like kind of an old school, probably early 80s RV.
Which, I mean, since we knew what the movie was about, you might as well have put free candy on the side of the RV.
Yeah, I mean, nothing good comes from going up to an old RV on the street. And we know it was established, the audience sees the girls have an interest in this RV and want to play, but their older siblings put a stop to it at the time. So presumably, when they disappear, everyone automatically assumes that the RV has something to do with it, and it does.
And someone is inside the RV.
Yeah, someone's inside the RV as well. You saw it. We watch it drive into the neighborhood. You can hear the radio playing inside. So we know that someone drove that RV there, and it's parked out in front of a house that no one's living in. It's for sale. So we know the girls, that somehow the RV was part of this abduction. We're not really sure how yet. So it doesn't take long for the police to track down the RV, and Paul Dano is inside the RV. And the girls are not there, and there's no evidence of the girls. However, Paul Dano is pretty creepy and pretty freaked out, and kind of comes off as being guilty because he's just really freaked out. Well, it turns out that Paul Dano is what they say he was 26 years old, or he's in his
somewhere around that age.
At least in his 20s. And he's had some stunted mental development.
Yeah, the mental capacity of a 10-year-old.
They point out that he has the mental capacity of a 10-year-old, and they have a hard time interrogating him because he doesn't really understand the questions, and he doesn't really provide any information that's helpful. So
they basically say that he doesn't understand the question, that you can ask him a question and he doesn't understand it. And I believe this plays in later in the movie.
Yeah, they make a point of they had polygraphed the families, and at one point Maria Bello makes a point of asking Jake Gyllenhaal if they had passed the polygraph test, and he said yes. So we know that they took polygraphs. Then they ask if Paul Dano had passed the polygraph, and Jake Gyllenhaal basically says, you can't answer it if you don't understand the question, right? So basically, the polygraph means nothing with Paul Dano, but there is something's up with this guy, and everybody kind of, I think, assumes that he is somehow involved in this abduction, especially in the first couple days of the investigation, including Hugh Jackman, who has really taken on kind of the really aggressive, you got to find the guys, we got to find my daughter, find the guy that took my daughter, because at this point, he thinks that the girls are alive, and the longer that it takes to find them, the slimmer the chances are of them being found alive. So he's really on the police to find them, and he thinks that they've got the guy in custody. However, they really don't have any evidence to hold Paul Dano in custody other than just being involved with the RV and being kind of a sketchy guy.
Right, they search the RV and there's just no evidence, not a fiber or thread.
They talk to his aunt. His aunt explains that he lives with her, but he'll often sleep in the RV. And Hugh Jackman cannot believe that.
And his aunt is Melissa Leo.
I'm sorry, Melissa Leo is the aunt. And it turns out that he had lost the story is that Paul Dano had lost his family when he was a young boy, and that his aunt and this aunt and uncle, I don't know if they're really related or not. He refers to them as aunt and uncle. I don't know if the idea is that they're supposed to be related, or he just refers to them as aunt and uncle. But they have taken him in and raised him, and he's been kind of this semi catatonic at times, sort of like autistic, character, and she mentions at one point in the movie that he doesn't say a whole lot. Since he lost his family, he picks his words carefully.
Now, something else we should point out that Hugh Jackman picks up on And I also think this is kind of part of the clue in the movie, is that he questions the fact that if this Paul Dano character has the mental capacity of a 10-year-old, how is he driving? Why does he have a driver's license?
And, you know, Jake Gyllenhaal says, only thing he can say is that, well, he has a legal license in the state of Pennsylvania to drive. And that's an interesting, that's an interesting part of it. The only time we really see Paul Dano driving the RV is when he's surrounded by police and he kind of panics and tries to get away, but just basically drives into a tree. Mm-hmm. And that's when they capture him. And he crawls up into into a luggage area and in the RV, and they find him there. So Paul Dano is not really shown a whole lot of capacity for being able to perpetrate this kind of crime, to snatch, two girls in their own neighborhood in broad daylight. And Jake Gyllenhaal is dubious of Paul Dano being the abductor, because he just doesn't think that he has the mental capacity to do a crime like this without leaving evidence.
Well, you can see he's torn.
Yeah.
Because in one scene, he's a guy who is trying to pursue this case in the right way. Now, don't get me wrong. He has his tactics that are fairly harsh throughout. I mean, he has no problem.
He's a hardcore interrogator.
Right.
I mean, and he's taking this. He takes the whole case extremely seriously.
Right.
I mean, like
this
I said,
this is his.
He's spending every waking moment working on this case.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the Paul Dano character does seem like incapable of being a mastermind of something like this. Now, there was a point in this movie where I thought this was like a Primal Fear type of thing with Ed Norton, where Paul Dano was going to get out of the police station after being interrogated, and all of a sudden become a very lucid, psychotic, abductor.
Also a Kaiser Soze type twist.
Yeah, exactly.
As well. I mean, that's something that's fairly common, and I agree. I thought that might be a possibility as well. When he gets released, Hugh Jackman, the Keller Dover character, goes to confront him at the police station and actually grabs him and gets him in a position where no one else can hear him. And Paul Dano says to him at that point something that he also believed was a clue in the case. He said something like, "They didn't cry until I left."
Yeah.
And Hugh Jackman takes that as, he does know something.
Right.
He is convinced at this point.
He's either the perpetrator or he was there. He knows where they are, even if he wasn't the one who abducted them and tried to hurt them.
Right. And the final straw being that he goes to his home, sees him walking the dog. Now, at this point, this is something that's never really come back to, but I think it's all part of the way what he was exposed to when he was raised. But he actually lifts the dog up and kind of like lets it hang there.
Yeah, by the leash. The dog is basically hanging by its leash and collar, by the neck, and he holds it up. He holds that poor dog up there for maybe 30 seconds, and just kind of looks at. I mean, it was kind of like as soon as he got away from the house, like he had this sadistic streak. Like maybe the way I would imagine young aspiring serial killers go and like chop up squirrels or rabbits or something.
This did not endear me to Paul Dano any more than I already was. So.
Yeah,
and then the final straw was the fact that the girls, when they were all together at Thanksgiving, they sang the Jingle Bells, except for the Jingle Bells, Batman smells, Robin lays an egg. And I won't go through the entire song, but
thank you.
Paul Dano is singing that as he's walking the dog, and Hugh Jackman's like, "All right."
He heard this song. Where did you hear the song?
Right.
Now, I don't know. When Hugh Jackman goes to the house that night, now we should say they released Paul Dano against, Hugh Jackman has asked, I don't know if ask is the right word, basically yelled at Jake Gyllenhaal that you need to keep this guy, in custody.
Right.
And Jake Gyllenhaal actually tries to keep him in custody for a little bit longer just because there's too many unanswered questions.
Right.
He's trying to respect the family's wishes to some extent within what he can within the law. But Paul Dano is released, and which leads to the Hugh Jackman confrontation where he hears Paul Dano what he thinks is a confession. Mm-hmm. So nothing's happening. The police they don't have any evidence that he said that, and they can't really follow up on it. So Hugh Jackman takes the law into his own hands and goes, and I think he's just going to kind of stake out that house and see if he can find any more clues. But when he sees Paul Dano and Paul Dano starts singing the song, he just loses it. I mean, I don't know how much of that. What's your opinion on that, Vince? How much of that was premeditated?
No, I think you're right. I think he was just there to kind of. I think at that point his intentions were, as he was saying, to kind of help the police.
Yeah, I don't think he really went there with the intention of abducting Paul Dano, but he did have a gun in the truck, so he takes the gun.
Well, I think his character was established as someone who would probably...
Yeah, he would be packing heat.
Yeah.
I mean, we know he knows how to use a gun and kind of comes from, kind of that survivalist sort of mentality. So that's not surprising that he had the gun. So I don't necessarily think that means it was premeditated. But when he does, when he hears the song, he kind of freaks and was like, takes Paul Dano at gunpoint, takes him to an abandoned apartment building that he owns. It was inherited.
Right.
His parents had lived there, and he had already mentioned this earlier in the movie that he had this apartment building and
it was dilapidated.
It was dilapidated. Needed way too much renovating to be worth doing to sell and to rent. So we know he's got this building. So he takes Paul Dano there, and this is where the real heart of the movie gets going. His plan is, well, if the police can't get any information out of this guy, I know he's got information because I heard him say that they were crying before I left them, and I heard him singing the song, and I know he's capable of some sadistic behavior because I saw him hang the dog. Right. So he takes him to the apartment, and the next thing we know, he goes and finds Terrence Howard. Now, Terrence Howard is the father of the other girl that's abducted, the neighbor, the friend. And he has Terrence Howard meet him at the apartment building. And he reveals to Terrence Howard his true plan. He has Paul Dano under custody, essentially, in the bathroom of this building. And he is going to beat and or torture the information out of Paul Dano.
Now, at first Terrence Howard is like, we can't do this. But we see this twice in the movie that... And I'm going to say that as the father of a young daughter, I don't feel like any actions that were taken by the Hugh Jackman character or Terrence Howard is out of the realm of possibility.
Not unreasonable. Not necessarily legal.
No, not legal.
Maybe not moral.
Yeah, but...
Not unreasonable.
I've always said that I would be probably capable of the same type of behavior in that situation, and I could feel his rage.
Very compelling performance from Hugh Jackman, I just say, because when he portrays the father who is just at his wit's end. He wants his daughter back so bad, and he just. It's like that he realizes, like when he's confronting Jake Gyllenhaal, the couple times he does that, you can see in his eyes that he understands that Jake Gyllenhaal is doing a good job, or at least he knows that he wants to find the daughter as well. But he is just so passionate about it and just so upset and enraged that he pushes it over the line. He goes over his limits.
There's a couple times he breaks down.
Yeah.
And he questions what he's doing himself. But he makes a point of putting a picture of the girls in this it's like in a bathroom area, and he puts a picture up and says, "This is to remind us why we're doing this."
Right. Well, and the other, I think this really kind of gets to the theme of the whole movie. Man's limits. What everybody's got a line that they can cross under the right circumstances. Hugh Jackman's line might be at a different place than, say, Terrence Howard's, but he crosses his line. Terrence Howard, in a way, crosses his line. Mm-hmm. His line is not in the same realm as Hugh Jackman's. He has to deal with things morally. Terrence Howard cries throughout almost this entire movie after the first scene, right?
Right.
Because he's not necessarily channeling his rage the way that, or his, the feeling.
His is more of a grief,
right?
I think
he's grieving.
Yeah, he's grieving.
He's grieving, and Hugh Jackman just wants to do something. He wants to fix things. He wants to be that alpha male.
Yeah.
Like he talks about to his son in the very first scene.
He's a carpenter. He builds things. He fixes things. He's, like you said, kind of a survivalist. He's got that talk about his father, how the most important thing he ever said to him was be prepared for anything, whether it's a tornado.
Well, he makes the point in that story. He makes the point of saying that whatever disaster may befall us, whether it's a hurricane, a tornado, a war, whatever, I don't remember exactly the quote, but whenever that occurs, the food's going to quit coming to the stores, and it's going to be everybody for themselves, and humans are going to turn on each other. Mm-hmm. You need to be prepared to protect your family,
right?
And be prepared to deal with that when everything goes to hell, right? Well, on a microcosmic level, that's what he experiences in this movie. And he is the guy who turns on humanity because he crosses that moral line. He crosses that line when he takes Paul Dano and basically starts beating him up and threatening to torture and eventually torturing Paul Dano for information. He has crossed that line that he was warning his son about.
Right. And like I said, it's layered. You wonder, is this what he was was he saying this is who you need to prepare to become to survive, or was he saying that you need to be the one to keep your cool and not become that person? Did he fall into, which one did he fall into? And like I said, it's layered, and I think you can interpret it either way, and I think that's on purpose. I think this movie is smart enough to let you kind of think and make your own decision.
Well, I think another interesting little element to it is alcohol, because that Hugh Jackman is a religious man, or at least he has a respect for prayer and for a higher power. They establish that throughout the entire movie. There are a couple scenes where alcohol is involved, partly because he's trying to hide what he's doing to Paul Dano from Jake Gyllenhaal, who is a really good cop and knows something's up. But he mentions that he hasn't had a drink in a year or 2 years or whatever it is.
It was longer than that. It was like 8 or 9 years, I thought.
But he makes a point of saying, well, I haven't had a drink in this long, but now I'm drinking because I'm dealing with the loss of my daughter. It was sort of a smokescreen, but at the same time, it gives, it's one of those little elements where it gives a little bit of an insight into maybe where Hugh Jackman's coming from, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe his religion is, a lot of people find help dealing with addiction by looking to religion and spirituality. Maybe that, I'm kind of riffing on it here.
Right.
Maybe that's where that came from. So, and then at one point, his son kind of confronts him. He smells alcohol in his breath and basically says, you told me to be prepared and be a man, but you're the one getting drunk.
Right.
So he throws that back in his face. So like this whole theme of like that whole being prepared, protecting your family, doing what you got to do to survive is a major theme in this. And I think it's cool because that's not the kind of theme you might necessarily get in an abduction movie very often.
Right, and we should mention that Maria Bello, who plays Grace Dover, she becomes catatonic, relies heavily on drugs to keep her,
she's taking
sedated.
prescription. Yeah, she's taking prescription tranquilizers or anti-anxiety meds or something that she already had a prescription for before this started, right?
Right.
But she hardly gets out of bed for half the movie because she is so upset. So I think that's just an interesting little twist, little element, like addiction, and maybe not so much addiction, but just like the acceptance that it's not a big deal to take tranquilizers when you're going through this traumatic experience, or it's not a big deal that you may have been sober for 8 or 9 years, but it's not a big deal to start drinking if again, it's those lines that people are crossing because of these extreme circumstances.
Right, exactly. Now, I think it's time that we talk about the crowd that we saw this with.
Yeah, it was a major part of the experience for both of us, I think.
It was a very strange experience. I've never experienced anything like this in any movie I've ever seen. And, I've got maybe this movie got me thinking just in general, but why the reactions were the way they are. Basically, the audience we saw it with treated this movie like it was some kind of dark comedy.
Yeah, they would laugh at the most inappropriate times. There was not a single joke in this movie.
No.
There was not a single joke. Now, there were a couple things early that were kind of cute, when they establish that the families get together and they have fun.
But it's almost that normal banter that you have just as being human. There was nothing that was supposed to be a written out punchline. They didn't bring any comedy writers in. This was just natural speech. But these people would laugh. I mean,
it wasn't just one person. It was like almost everyone in the theater but us, essentially.
Right. And it was, at first I was like, is this like kind of a nervous laughter? They're not sure how to react. But as the movie went on, it became apparent that these people, I really, my only explanation is that TV and movies, whether it's Honey Boo Boo or some other, grown-ups too, that this has hindered the ability for people to follow basic plots. And also the fact that they're expecting this punchline, because almost everything now has a punchline. It can't be a serious drama.
No, you're right. And everyone expects, even in serious dramas, people expect the comic relief. People expect that one character that, and maybe not serious dramas as much as just, action dramas and the whole, the American action cinema kind of scene. There's always that comic relief character. Shakespeare had Falstaff, and everybody else has that kind of that clown character at some point. I got the feeling that the people in the theater with us thought that Terrence Howard was the clown character. The man is crying throughout most of the film.
Right.
And every time he says something to his wife or to Hugh Jackman when he's crying, the crowd would erupt in laughter. I saw Anchorman in the theater the weekend it came out. There was more laughter in this movie when you and I saw it than when I saw Anchorman. It was that bad.
And every time it would happen, the are you serious? Would just well up in me. I mean, it would build as the movie went on, and that I was in utter shock by the end. I mean, I had literally never experienced anything like that in a movie, and I thought it was disturbing.
Oh, I definitely thought it was disturbing. I found myself craning my neck and squinting my eyes, looking through the darkness, trying to see the people's faces. Like, who are these people? Are we sitting around here with a bunch of monsters, or what's the story? And they were regular people, but they obviously were regular people that just didn't get it.
Yeah.
And it was really creepy, though. It was a child abduction movie where there's some pretty graphic torture scenes.
Yes.
Because Hugh Jackman works the hell out of Paul Dano. At one point, when you first see Paul Dano's face exposed after his initial really bad beating, which had occurred the day before, I think, he's barely recognizable. I mean, even the crowd that was laughing at this stuff gasped when they revealed that face.
Well, shortly afterwards, this is the scene with Viola Davis where she pulled off his hood, and like you said, it was just he was just pounded meat, and she showed a picture of the girls, and for some reason, when she pulled out that picture and said, "Look at this picture," that brought laughter.
The crowd started laughing. That's absolutely right. It was the most improper time to laugh that I can think of in a cinema experience. And, this is a powerful performance from Viola Davis. I mean, she's basically brought in because, Terrence Howard, wants to bring her into this mix. And wants to, I think, really get her endorsement because he is just morally, stretched at this point, right? He's grieving, plus he's involved with what Hugh Jackman's doing, which is morally questionable, and he brings her in, and she's kind of the strong one of the two in that relationship, right?
I thought this was a brilliant scene, by the way.
Oh yeah, that was a great scene, and of course, Hugh Jackman's first thought is, "What are you doing? Why are you bringing your wife here?" You know, like to him, it was completely inconceivable,
Right.
because his wife is catatonic on on tranquilizers in her bed, grieving at home. He's keeping all of this from her.
Now, weren't you expecting her to come in and be the voice of reason and be like, you have to put a stop? In fact, the scene kind of starts like that. She unties him.
It's like, what are you doing?
But then, I even think that she was trying to play the good cop, bad cop thing.
Oh, it was some classic good cop, bad cop.
Because when push comes to shove, and Terrence Howard wants to let him go, she's the one.
She's like, look, we're not going to be involved in this, but we're not going to stop him.
We're not going to stop him.
Because she thought, hey, I know this
If
is
there's
morally questionable, but we might get some results here.
Yeah, if there's a chance, we're going to let it happen.
But those scenes, especially the ones where Terrence Howard's talking to her and Hugh Jackman, and he's crying, and he's obviously, like I said, morally stretched. That seemed to be the funniest thing in the movie for the people that we watched it about.
I don't know. Maybe I'm on the wrong side of things. Maybe this was more of a comedy effort than I realized. But
I don't know if anybody out there has seen the movie and had a similar experience. Please let us know. Maybe it's an epidemic, where people just don't understand intense drama like that now, or maybe I will give the audience a little bit of a free pass in some of those scenes, because there were 20 minute stretches of this movie that were really intense.
Yeah.
Right. You throw in these other elements we're talking about, the way it was shot, the environmental elements and everything. Maybe part of it was just they needed that release at some point. Like, I came to the movie to be entertained, and at some point I'm going to laugh because I'm completely just wound up.
But they treated Terrence Howard like he was Martin Lawrence.
Yeah, I thought that exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's some things you can infer from that. I don't want to put people's motivations on trial here.
I know we both talked about possibly a racism slant on that. However, there was a couple behind you that was also laughing that I think kills that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't. And I don't know if I would call it racist, but there may be a racial element to it in some sense. But yeah, it didn't matter. People of all creeds and colors were laughing at this movie in that theater that night.
Yeah.
Which is, again, disturbing and creepy. But,
And there's another part at the end, and we'll get there very soon. But there's another part that I just thought the crowd, that basically told me that the crowd simply did not get this movie.
Yeah. Well, just back to the general narrative of what's going on in the story. Meanwhile, all this stuff's going on with Hugh Jackman and Paul Dano. He actually fashions up using his carpentry and renovation skills, fashions up kind of a torture chamber with a shower where he can blast Dano with hot water and torture him that way. It's basically a sweat box. It's basically like solitary confinement. He has no light. All he has is a shower that blasts him with hot or cold water, depending on what Jackman wants to do to him. So this is, and needless to say, Jackman is getting no good information at all from this.
No, but the thing is, he never loses the thought that he's involved. I mean, there's times where
because Jackman heard him say,
right.
No one else in the movie heard Paul Dano say they were crying. They didn't start crying till I left,
right?
Except for Hugh Jackman. So he thinks he's got something. He's thinking that he's got some bit of information that just no one else understands because they didn't hear it. So he knows in his mind, he's crossing these moral lines, but in his mind there is fruit at the end of this. Like there some piece of information will eventually spill out of this guy that he's torturing. So he keeps doing it.
Meanwhile, Jake Gyllenhaal is still on the case. There's a point where there's a candlelight vigil, and he notices kind of strange behavior from one of the people in the crowd. He tries to chase him down. The guy loses him, but at this point he feels like there is another suspect in the case. And this leads to a whole nother piece of investigation where it leads to a girl that recognizes the police sketch on TV as someone who shops at a certain establishment, buys young girl clothes of different ages. and leads along this whole path. He also is checking with all the sex offenders in the area and actually comes across which of course is a this, by the way, this town that these guys live in, it's like middle America, but this place is nuts. I mean, there's a lot of craziness going on in this town. Apparently the priest, maybe a little bit cliche, but a local priest is a drunk and a former, I guess he's former, it could be current, pedophile, but he investigates this church and finds a place behind the refrigerator, and there's a dead body down there.
Yeah, there's like I don't know if I guess it's like a crawl space under this building, except it's he finds a dead body that's been dead for a long time. And one thing we noticed right away is that the dead body has a pendant on a necklace that looks like a maze.
Right.
And you see this, they make a point of photographing it a couple times while we see the body, so that's going to play a part in the story.
Right, and the priest's story is also that this guy had come for confession and had confessed to killing like 26 children.
Yes, and he had come for confession, and did they really ever say how the guy died? I mean, did the priest kill him, or? Yeah,
the priest basically took it into his own hands.
And basically tied him up and just left him to die.
Right.
And
didn't know his name, didn't know who he was, but just left him down there to die.
And all we know is that this guy died 5 years ago, and he's got a maze pendant on his necklace.
And there's other pieces of the movie. We won't necessarily give away every single piece of it, but there's other pieces that start making things come together as a viewer, which I thought it was clever. We figured it out, but they give you the proper clues to figure it out. They didn't telegraph anything.
Well, there was an element of realism that you don't always get in these types of movies. Like you said, movies that try to throw extra twists in. This one had twists, but it had realistic twists. It had clues, and the clues all lead to the same sort of conclusion if you look at it critically. But there was this other suspect. It turns out this other suspect was a former victim, a former child abduction victim who actually escaped. And as the clues kind of come together, it becomes obvious that he escaped from either the guy that was found dead or some other person who was involved with that guy.
Because his home was filled with mazes.
He's obsessed with mazes.
Yeah.
Right? So, now, at one point, the townspeople, everybody thinks that this guy's the killer or the abductor, I should say. Well, they think killer, because Jake Gyllenhaal, because he's a great cop, finds the guy, traces him down, and as he goes through his house, he finds storage containers full of children's clothing with blood on it. So
and snakes.
Which, if there was one thing I can be critical about this, is the snake angle was kind of weird.
Well, I remember that this is spoiler central time, the Paul Dano character had an incident with snakes when he was younger. I feel like that was something that these abductors used as part of their programming.
I think that's definitely what they were going for, but why would you have these storage?
This guy was
he was just obsessed with snakes?
He was probably put through a lot of the same type of brainwashing, during his abduction, and it was probably one of those things where you see that someone in this situation, they become obsessed with what they were in, maybe trying to find the reason that someone would do such a thing. They put themselves in that own situation because the clothes that were covered with blood was pig's blood. They found mannequins buried in the yard. Like he was trying to mimic.
Well, he was reenacting
right.
this abduction that he blamed on the quote unquote invisible man. Mm-hmm. Remember?
Right.
So he was basically trying to recreate the situation, I guess, to somehow get closure or somehow deal with some internal.
Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, the guy was mentally damaged. He'd been through a horrific experience. But at the time when they first find this stuff, they find clothing that matches clothing that the parents know belong to the abducted children.
Right.
Back to Terrence Howard and Hugh Jackman's kids, which are still missing. At this point now, we think dead because these clothes are bloody.
But
However,
keep in mind, we see him sneaking around the homes of the two abducted victims.
yeah, we
We don't know his motivations at the time.
but he's clearly, now that we know, he's taking those objects, those pieces of clothing from the homes, and then using that with the pig's blood to make it look like there were bloody clothing left from the missing girls.
Right.
So Jake Gyllenhaal starts to piece all this stuff together. Meanwhile, Hugh Jackman starts to piece it together as well. And I mean, I'll just go ahead and say it. Melissa Leo is behind the whole thing.
Right.
And it was kind of two things were kind of obvious. One has to do with the plot, in that there really weren't any other suspects that were conceivably the abductor, because we know it was pretty easy to put together that the man found in the priest's crawl space was her husband, because of the time frame, for one. It's also pretty easy to piece together that the person wearing the maze necklace might be the guy who's tortured these kids with mazes to make the one guy who escaped
And
be obsessed with them.
she had also mentioned that her husband disappeared 5 years ago after an argument.
After an argument, right? So it's pretty easy to start to piece it together.
To me, another piece of the evidence was, I thought it was obvious that she was wearing old woman makeup. I mean, they were trying to age her like 20 years. And to me, I was thinking, unless she plays a very pivotal role, why would you just not get an actor that's older?
Right, and when you look at the cast now, I mean, looking at the list,
right, she's not very recognizable.
Why do you get Oscar-winning actress Melissa Leo?
Yeah.
2 years off an Oscar win, to play a important character in the movie.
Right.
So in retrospect, okay, spoiler alert, you're going to figure that out. I have a feeling if you're at all savvy about the way this stuff works. So you knew it was going to be her. Now the questions, though, how was Paul Dano? Was Paul Dano more involved than we know? I mean, what are the angles? Well, Hugh Jackman figures it out to some extent and goes. He actually goes and meets with Melissa Leo before he knows that she's the killer or the abductor.
Oh, also, just real quick to interject, there's another clue leading up to some other things where at one point the house that the RV had pulled up to originally was also involved in a child abduction.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
The owner of that house, her son had disappeared 26 years ago, which would have put this kid, I felt it was obvious.
Paul Dano was the abducted child 26 years prior, and the reason he is so mentally sketchy in part is because of what he went through, which was, obviously similar to what the guy who actually escaped, what he went through. Now, there's another pretty wild scene in there that we should also mention. Hugh Jackman talks to Melissa Leo, and he's really just trying to gather information at this point still. He's got Paul Dano in his torture chamber, hidden away. He goes and talks to Melissa Leo. Now, meanwhile, there is a killer. Who they think is the killer is into interrogation, and he is supposedly drawing a map to the location of the missing girl's bodies.
Yeah, he confesses, according to.
But instead, all he does is draw maps, or mazes, right? Instead of a map. So Jake Gyllenhaal, and again, somebody who just crosses a line because he's so passionate about solving this case, barges into the interrogation room and physically, grabs the suspect. A couple uniformed cops go in there with him, and in the struggle, the suspect grabs one of their guns and very graphically blows his brains out right there in the interrogation room. Pretty intense scene. And so now you've got a situation where the only person that people think knows where the bodies are is now dead, and that's kind of on Jake Gyllenhaal's conscience because he crossed that line. He's been a very professional cop up to this point, hard-nosed but professional. He kind of lost it a little bit, and in that moment of weakness, so to speak, the suspect takes his life. So he may have just lost the only lead he had to where these bodies might be, buried or hidden away.
Yeah, even when this guy is caught, Hugh Jackman still believes that he's connected somehow. He never lets go of the belief that Paul Dano is somehow behind it. Never.
Because, again, he knew what Paul Dano said to him, and he knows that Paul Dano would not have said that to him had he not seen the girls at some point.
Right.
Well, another interesting twist is that Terrence Howard's daughter is soon found alive because she escapes. Mm-hmm. Now, when Hugh Jackman goes to the hospital to see her, to get, essentially he wants to, support his friends, but his main motivation is give me some information on where my daughter is. Right? When he does this, he's given clue that Melissa Leo is behind this.
Well, she wakes up and said, "You were there."
Right, and he had been there talking to Melissa Leo. Right? So that's his clue. Okay, she's the one. So he runs out of the hospital, doesn't tell anybody where he's going, runs out of there, loses the police. I mean,
well, Gyllenhaal's like, "I know where you're going," and he goes to the dilapidated apartment building.
Right, because Jake Gyllenhaal has pieced it together that apartment building is a clue into what Hugh Jackman's been up to. Because while all this is going on, the Paul Dano character is gone. Yeah. And people presume that he just ran away because he was a suspect. Jake Gyllenhaal doesn't necessarily think that, because Jake Gyllenhaal knows that this guy doesn't have the mental capacity to be that kind of a criminal.
And he sees the rage in Jackman. And he knows, he's a smart cop.
And there are a couple of really good exchanges in the movie. We won't go through every scene, but there's some really good exchanges between Gyllenhaal and Jackman where it's just two top-notch actors in top form going at each other.
Again, we can tell you every detail of this movie. We can spoil it to death, and it's still worth seeing because of the performances.
Yes. So Hugh Jackman goes to Melissa Leo's house, right? And this time he's prepared. He thinks he's going to go there and get the one up on her. But what he doesn't know is that she is a criminal mastermind. She is a very sharp person who is capable of doing all the crimes that we've been talking about, throughout the movie. And she gets the jump on him, essentially, in order to. She's basically holding his daughter's life, above his head, basically saying, "If you ever want to see your daughter again, do this." She drugs him,
gives him the Michael Jackson Jesus juice.
Yeah. Oh man, the Jesus juice, which it looked a lot like that old grape Everclear drink.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
But so she drugs him. She takes him outside. There's an old Trans Am, which was a sweet ride.
It was a sweet ride.
But there's an old Trans Am, and under the Trans Am is a pit. And in the pit, she basically gets Hugh Jackman. She wants Hugh Jackman to jump in the pit on his own accord. He says, "You'll have to shoot me to get me in that pit."
And she does.
And she shoots him in the leg. So he ends up down in the pit. And she basically tells him, "Don't die on me. Stay. This might take 24 hours." And this was a really chilling line. And she said, "I want you to be awake when I throw your girl's dead body down there with you."
Yeah, I almost thought the turn was almost shocking in a way. You
knew she was behind it, but at the same time,
I didn't expect her to be so cold.
She was hardcore.
I was really expecting this angle of loneliness.
Like maybe she was abducting children. Almost to like keep them or something.
Right.
Because she mentions how, I guess the fight between her and her husband were about abducting the children and keeping them or not keeping them. Like there was mentions of that. Like, obviously they kept Paul Dano. Mm-hmm. Maybe the intention was to keep them until they had them reprogrammed, and then or keep them as prisoners until they were reprogrammed enough to actually be their kids or something.
Right, and I was even of the thought that, there was no real alluding to other abductions in recent times. So I thought, well, maybe the abductions ended with the father leaving, not necessarily the abductions, but the killings and all that, and
Right.
she was just doing the abduction part, but maybe not the killing. I wasn't convinced, but as soon as she turned, boy, you knew that.
Oh yeah, she's a nasty one.
Yeah, and she said it, and here's the kicker: her reasoning was religious. She wanted to. It was like the abduction of children was necessary to bring out the evil in people and to prove that evil still existed.
Which she proved, because she took a man who was, through her actions, she took a man who was religious, family oriented, seemed to be of pretty strong moral fiber, and essentially turned him evil, where he was torturing an innocent man. And this isn't, these torture scenes, it was pretty intense, and you saw a man who, like I said, crossed the line and lost it, became that evil that he warned his son about,
Right.
in the very beginning of the movie, which, again, through her actions, she basically brought that evil out of him.
Now, do you feel like she knew that he had been the one to do something with? His name was Alex, the Paul Dano character. Do you think, because it was never really clear, obviously she knew he was missing, and he was someone that was home every night, according to her earlier. So do you think that she just went ahead and, it was obvious that she was this mastermind? Do you think that she figured out early on he's responsible?
I think she knew he was responsible. Maybe not right out the gate, but she knew he was responsible when he went to talk to her before this encounter. The first time he goes and talks just to her, because you remember that scene where they're sitting across from each other, and she mentions how Paul Dano character, that Alex chooses his words very carefully, doesn't say a whole lot. I kind of thought that was her kind of saying to Hugh Jackman, I don't know what you've done with him. If you're trying to get information out of him, good luck. It's kind of the way I've took that. I don't necessarily think she really cared. To
Right.
me, he just happened to be an abductee that they got so brainwashed that they could keep,
Right.
and not have to worry about him running off. But I definitely think that she knew. I definitely think that she knew based on that conversation, because there was some mind games going on there. Looking in retrospect, now
Sure.
at the time you don't necessarily know that, though I did kind of have a little bit of an inkling at that point that she was kind of playing him a little bit. But I think she definitely knew based on that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Gyllenhaal is putting together the rest of this, because he's very frustrated, and he goes out and does what we all want to do, and just smashes his keyboard on his desk, basically wrecks his desk. But the pictures that were taken at the church were there, and he has this drawing that the other suspect was doing with the maze. And he notices at this point that the maze matches the maze on the pendant.
Right. The suspect, when he was trying to draw the map, was actually drawing the maze, and was about 3/4 of the way done with the maze.
And then he remembers looking at a picture of the father at the home of the Paul Dano character and his aunt, of the same pendant on the father. Yep. So he puts it all together.
So he goes to Melissa Leo's house and essentially finds her attempting to drug the Hugh Jackman's daughter to death, because her plan is to shoot this kid up with drugs to kill her, and then toss her dead body down on Hugh Jackman in the pit out in her yard, right? So Jake Gyllenhaal gets there just in time. They fire at each other.
I think she knows that the jig is up.
Yeah, she knows that she just needs to. At this point, I think her motivation is just, I'm gonna just completely blow Hugh Jackman's mind here, because he dared to try to step up on me, right? So I'm gonna toss this dead girl's body on him, and that's gonna be the end of it, right? And I'll flee or whatever. Well, Jake Gyllenhaal gets there. She's shooting up the girl, injecting her. He shoots her. He shoots Melissa Leo. Melissa Leo gets a shot at him too. Gets a grazing shot on his head, right? So they both take bullets, but thankfully Jake Gyllenhaal is just a flesh wound. But he takes Melissa Leo out completely. Then he grabs the girl, and she is foaming at the mouth from this drug, and he's got to get her to a hospital to save her life. And that's a really wild scene, is when he's driving through traffic at breakneck speed. He's
losing blood. He's got blood in his eyes.
Yeah, he's getting woozy, and he's having a hard time seeing, and he's probably, concussed, and he's got, it's a flesh wound, but it's on his head. It's on, the temple, area. So bad place to get a flesh wound, even though it's only a flesh wound. So he's struggling, but he gets there in time to save the girl. Now, at this point, the only loose end is Hugh Jackman in the pit. But no one knows Hugh Jackman was there. Nobody, he didn't tell anybody where he was going. There's no evidence. Apparently, Melissa Leo, because she is a mastermind of a criminal, right? Because has gotten rid of all the evidence, apparently. They're excavating the yard.
Well, even before this, I feel.
Okay, go ahead.
They in the hospital, the little girl wants to meet her hero. So she goes there because there's an important piece to this, I feel. You got to remember what a good detective he is, for one. It leads to the ending. She comes in, and he notices that there's a red whistle around her neck.
Right.
Now, this is an earlier thing from the story where he knows that she had lost a whistle, and he's like, oh, you found the whistle. And after she leaves, the mom said, well, we just got her another whistle.
Now, and the mom also mentions that her daughter had been saying that her and her friend had found this red whistle before they were abducted. Mm-hmm. And they don't believe it because the whistle had been gone for a while. But and they don't really say what happened to the whistle, but is it possible that she left that outside or something? And maybe,
I think
they were kind of coerced to get in, maybe to get into the RV with the whistle or something. They don't really go into that detail. But she mentions that the daughter had said that she had found the whistle.
And also, Jackman's wife, she gets into the fact that she misses him, that he's a good man, and also what's going to happen to him if he's caught. And Gyllenhaal will likely go to jail, so we kind of know what's going to happen if he's found, which I think all of this is very important.
Yes. We don't want him to die, but we'd also should he go to jail? Probably for what he did. I mean, well, not probably. I mean, legally, yes.
Yes.
From a moral standpoint, as you said, you have a young daughter. If would you have gone to these lengths, and maybe you would empathize? There's a lot of empathy that can in this movie. But Jake Gyllenhaal goes back to the house where the girls were abducted, or where they were held, and finds the crime team excavating the yard and everything, and they have to stop because the ground's frozen. Like we said, this started at Thanksgiving, so we're in the first week of December now. It's cold, ground's frozen. We've already seen some snow, and the crime scene team has to stop digging, and they walk away. And they had some music going there too, didn't they? And they shut everything down. So everything gets quiet.
There was some Radiohead, actually.
Yeah, true, very true. So everything gets quiet, and just faintly over the wind, you hear a whistle. Now, Jake Gyllenhaal is standing maybe 20 yards from, if that, from the Trans Am that's covering the hole, and we know that Hugh Jackman is injured but alive down in that pit. And we also have seen Hugh Jackman find the red whistle down in that pit because the girls had been held down there. Mm-hmm. So we know he's got the whistle. So as an audience, all of a sudden we hear a faint whistle, and Jake Gyllenhaal at first dismisses it, then hears it again, and then when there's that moment of recognition,
he turns towards the Trans Am.
I hear a whistle. He turns towards the Trans Am and also towards the camera. End of movie.
Fade to black.
Fade to black. Now, the audience found that scene to be really funny for some reason.
Well,
right?
not only funny, there was a combination of funny. There was what I thought was even weirder was oh man,
Yeah.
or I guess we got to wait for a sequel.
Like, you don't know what's getting ready to
Yeah,
happen.
right. I mean, they wanted another 20 minutes tacked onto the movie to find him, to book him, to show him going to jail, I guess.
And then maybe jump ahead 15 years and have him coming out and see his, grown daughter. I mean, what do they want?
I mean, I thought it was a brilliant ending because, like I said, the movie was already 2 hours plus long. We've already said that this movie doesn't tell you everything that you need to know every second of the movie. The whole point of his wife saying, now what's going to happen if he's found, to me explains, okay, this is likely what's going to happen.
Not a good thing for Hugh Jackman at this point.
But to me, it also leaves the possibility that you can kind of build your own story like you have your backstory. If you want to believe that he came out of the pit and the jury, was empathetic and said, okay, we're going to let him go. We understand what he was going through. Dano was maybe involved. He was there, so...
We also should... I mean, you're absolutely right. We know what happens with Dano because Gyllenhaal finds Dano in the torture chamber, and we find out that Dano... We confirm our suspicions that Dano was the abducted child from 26 years ago. We learned that from Melissa Leo. Well... They reunite him with his family. We know that he's being reunited with his family. So things are going to work out for Paul Dano, presumably, right? Things are going to work out for the kids. The only real twist is the Hugh Jackman piece. But Jake Gyllenhaal, one thing we know about him, too, is he's solved every case that he's been on.
Right.
So, to me, that ending is brilliant because, again, I don't really care at this point if Hugh Jackman goes to jail or not. I don't necessarily think that Jake Gyllenhaal is going to let it go because he does not leave cases unsolved.
Right. Number one. We've been shown time and time again that this guy's a good detective who cares, who's not just going to let something slide. So to me,
and the fact that he's a good man, that his family needs him, again, kind of reinforcing that protect your family, that traditional, father, male role model type of paradigm that they go into a little bit. To me, it felt like he was not going to rest until they found Hugh Jackman, whether he had run away or whether he was a victim or whatever. And all that did, when he recognized that whistle, that just told me that he just solved his case.
Right.
He's going to get Hugh Jackman out of there, and regardless of whether it's 20 years before he's a free man again, Jake Gyllenhaal just solved the case and saved a girl's dad and saved a wife's husband. And
the arc was completed.
Right, exactly. Maybe salvaged a good man, out of it. A man that has done evil things when pushed through these crazy circumstances.
But he's still going to be alive for his family.
And it made, I'm just going to throw this out there because I just kind of got this vibe now. We don't know anything about Jake Gyllenhaal's past or his family. Was there a father issue there? I mean, did he lose a father or something?
Right.
Maybe that's why he got involved with whatever he was involved with to get those tattoos. He was either, maybe he was in gang activity, maybe he was military. It's hard to say. It doesn't really look like military tattoos, but it almost makes it.
I was in the military. They don't give you tattoos in the military. You usually still get them on your own. It's not like something that they issue. I know I have tattoos. Maybe you think that the Navy gave them to me. But
they didn't?
No. Those are you can still get them on your own. So there's no such thing as like a military tattoo.
Well, if the military were going to give tattoos, they should just camouflage tattoo, people's arms and heads and
that would be the smart way to go, I guess.
Yeah, be really committed to that.
I just want to make sure everybody knew that there might be some mistake out there that there's military issued tattoos.
Right. Well, regardless of how he got the tattoos, all I'm saying is perhaps he was bringing some baggage. He did not want to see this family lose their father.
Right.
And so he was not going to leave the case unsolved. And like you said, closes the circle, ends the story arc. What more do you need? But the audience was disappointed.
No, big groaner from them.
Well, they laughed when they heard the whistle, and then they groaned when the movie ended.
Yeah.
Seconds later.
ending our disturbing experience with this audience as well.
But just to wrap things up here, I'm going to say this is you probably know by now. I really like the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend the movie, even if you've listened to these spoilers. There was plenty of neat stuff that we did not get into here.
The score is great throughout.
Yeah,
Johan Johansson did the scoring. Really kind of set the mood for the movie. Really kind of dark, creepy, great pacing. It really kind of leads up to to the kind of the big ending. It didn't feel long at all.
No, I don't have many criticisms of this movie. It did a good job of giving you bits and pieces, clues, and then they would call back to those things in most cases.
I mean, we are professionals, so we are professional movie watchers. So maybe some people wouldn't figure this out. I got to give people the benefit of the doubt.
I think anybody who really paid attention in the movie is going to, at the very least, know that Melissa Leo is involved. I mean, I think
that shoddy makeup.
You didn't like the makeup. I didn't think the makeup was that
more
bad.
Than anything. That was the big reveal to me.
I didn't think the makeup was that bad. But she's definitely frumped up for this movie. Melissa Leo's an attractive, relatively young woman compared to the character she's playing.
Definitely some frumping.
But she was frumped.
Yeah, thoroughly frumped.
I don't know if that's even a verb, but we'll do it. But I would recommend this movie. I think you probably would too, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would say I give this a smallest appendage on my hand, thumbs towards this. I can't say thumb, towards the ceiling. I know we ran into this last time. We were supposed to work this out beforehand, how we were going to do this whole rating thing.
Yeah, I would also point upward with the shortest appendage on my hand. The one, if you're looking at the top of the hand, it would be towards the middle, like pointing inward.
Oh yeah, it works on both hands, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it really does.
It really does.
I would take that appendage and I would move it towards the sky.
Towards the sky or ceiling, or definitely.
Right. Head, unless your hands are above your head.
Yep.
But yeah, we're gonna give this a good recommendation from both of us, and I think a very strong recommendation.
Definitely the best drama I've seen this year.
Yeah, and for those of you that are new to the DTMMB Media style, a lot of what we do are action films. We tend to hit the big summer blockbusters together and kind of focus on action fun type fare. Mm-hmm. This was a little different than what we normally go see. And
a little more serious review.
Yeah, and our review is a little more serious, but it's a more serious movie. I think the main thing to take out of this is the really everyone involved: acting, writing, cinematography, photography, direction, music score. I mean, you name it. Everything was just. There's not really a major flaw in this movie in terms of the performances or the the effort. The art is very strong in this movie, I thought.
I'd say, you're going to hear about this movie again possibly around Oscar time. I mean, beyond this and The Butler, I mean, has there been many other significant dramas that come to mind this year that might be in contention?
There's probably something that we're not thinking of.
I mean, we're probably not going to get a Best Actor out of this.
Well, okay. Here's an interesting thing I'll just throw out there kind of to wrap this up. Of this cast, great cast, like we said, nominated and award-winning actors, every one of them, who would get the nod? I'll tell you who I think, if you want, is Jake Gyllenhaal. I think would be my guy.
I would have to agree.
But Hugh Jackman would make a pretty good.
Both stellar performances, but Jake Gyllenhaal I felt was more of a reach. I mean, we know Hugh Jackman is kind of that angry character. I mean, I'll just go ahead and say, I don't want to compare this at all to Wolverine. He has held those movies together. I mean, some of those movies have been pretty weak, but it's been his performance and his portrayal, But we've seen angry Hugh Jackman before. Right.
Now Jake Gyllenhaal, I think, has kind of toughened up his image a little bit with roles like End of Watch. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily know this was as much of a stretch as it may have been say 5 years ago or something. But at the same time, I thought his performance was so good. Like I said, you see little weird ticks in things in him. You just the way he looked. He had that very critical look as a detective, but he also, you could tell, there was some baggage back there. It felt like he was trying to work as a way for some kind of penance or something. Like I said, there's a story there, and the way that he portrayed that to me, the only I didn't think Terrence Howard had necessarily the best performance in the movie.
No.
But I don't necessarily think he had a lot to work with. He had a
Right.
little bit smaller role. It was important to the story, but he didn't have as many. He didn't have the kind of scenes that Jackman and Gyllenhaal have. In that
I think he was supposed to be that moral center, but really didn't fulfill that role. I don't think that was his fault. There was so much more packed into the movie, and when you have guys like Jackman and Gyllenhaal just chewing up the scenes, there just wasn't a lot of time for him to go into a whole lot.
I don't think I don't want to be critical. I don't think he was bad. I just think that as far as the other performances in the movie, I mean, Maria Bello had like kind of, she was kind of the distraught, half, drugged up, mother and wife. But she did a really good job in it too. I thought she was very believable. Viola Davis was, she's always solid, and I mean, she was really good in it. Kind of like you said, she was kind of the strong, she was the strong person in that relationship with her and Terrence Howard, where you thought she was going to come in and put an end to the torture, but she says, you know what, do what you got to do. We just don't want to know about it. So, she was making a pretty tough moral judgment there, and did a good job kind of making that believable. So yeah, I think there were some really good performances. Paul Dano playing the, mentally, challenged Alex character.
Creepy guy.
Yeah, he's always creepy and kind of, douchey looking. But
it's like they did find like the two characters, like character actors out there. They're like, okay, we need the two weirdest, creepiest guys. I mean, these guys are going to be typecast. I mean, the other guy that was the suspect that killed himself. I mean, it seems like I had seen him before in something.
Yeah.
It's like he was just the creepy guy in that too.
I should have looked him up. I've definitely seen him in stuff.
He was actually the Joker's henchman in the second Batman movie. He played one of the Joker's henchmen. I do know that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah.
Which
I know I've seen him, but he's
creepy.
not somebody that you're going to, like, I couldn't tell you his name right now.
right.
But you've definitely seen him before if you're a movie, avid movie fan. You've run into him. Mm-hmm. But I think overall great performances, good art, smart movie. I would recommend. And again, like you said, I think we'll maybe see a few of these names pop up on some nomination lists, possibly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. This has been Vince DeGeorge and Chris Herndon doing Movies Are Cool. Later this week, we're going to hit up probably a weekdays again, which should be which should have a little more humor than this. Now, the crowd would be expected to laugh on our weekdays podcast, so, but not so much this one. They might want to listen. They might find this one funny. I don't know.
Actually, that crowd we watched this movie with probably found this hilarious.
Yes. I would say so, and maybe I don't want to know what else they would find hilarious, honestly. So we'll see you guys next time.
Goodbye.